Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. The dag end of Outsiders plus First Dog on the Moon.
As far as the Daesh death cult is concerned, it's coming after us. We may not always feel that we are at war with them, but they certainly think that they are at war with us.
Zarek, that things have changed there in the manner of the delivery of that message.
It is, isn't it? And you sort of see the tightrope that Malcolm Turnbull is walking. On the one hand, he's advancing his own views and the very socially progressive views in the Liberal Party on the one hand, but on the other hand, he's still got to try and talk to those who support the Abbott way of thinking and were the cornerstone of the coalition's electoral success only 3 years ago. So he's trying to do that, but in a much more refined and multi-layered way than the Tony Abbott would.
Parnell, does the show of PM sort of pinch it between the base of his party and the electoral base of the broader population?
No, I think it shows a PM who is able to communicate as a centrist and perhaps even put some of the ideas that Abbott was trying to get across in language that people will understand outside of that sort of Abbott base. So he's got a real point, and I know that Bill Shorten was up in arms immediately afterwards saying it's too soon to examine the reasons why something like this might happen. But it was a very clear way to lay out what the difference is between Australia and Brussels or Australia and Europe. And it was good communication for that reason.
From death cult Bernard to luminous multiculturalism, it's quite a transition.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull doesn't feel the urge that Tony Abbott did to exploit national security for his own political ends, and it's a poor fit for him to do so. The irony, though, is that Tony Abbott is the guy, and it was interesting that Malcolm Turnbull, I think, talking on Tuesday, kind of poo-pooed this idea a bit. But Tony Abbott is the guy who owns border security. He's the one who stopped the boats, whether Malcolm Turnbull likes it or not. Yes, there are a lot of factors. Kevin Rudd saying, no one will be settled here if you come by boat, that sort of thing. But Tony Abbott stopped the boats and secured the borders in a way that I think Malcolm Turnbull, in a way, is trading on. I think Tony Abbott's kind of right to say, well, hang on, this is actually what I did.
You mean campaigning on my record?
Malcolm Turnbull is campaigning on his record, and that's fortunately Turnbull doesn't face the problem that Julia Gillard had with Kevin Rudd's record of wanting to claim success with the GFC but not being able to actually mention the name Rudd. But nonetheless, it's an irony that Malcolm Turnbull kind of wants to be more centrist, thankfully. But look, Tony Abbott is the guy who does actually get the credit for securing the borders in a way that does reinforce our sense that we are different from Brussels and from Belgium and from France.
A reassuring sense indeed in a week like the one just passed. Thanks to our outsiders this morning, who have been Dr. Zari Gazaria, lecturer in politics at the School of Social Sciences at Monash University, author of Politics for Dummies, Bernard Keane, politics editor for Crikey, and Parnell Palmer-McGuinness, communications consultant and writer. 3 and a bit away from 10. Easter-tide dog, we have it for you. Hello, Patriots, and welcome to First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. I'm Walkley Award-winning cartoonist First Dog on the Moon. Happy Easter. A change of pace this week, listeners, something in keeping with this special day, the parable of Jesus and the Bilby. And thus it was Good Friday, a public holiday. Jesus had the day off and did sleep in until 8:30, after which he made himself a cup of tea and sat in his breakfast nook looking out the window. Since retiring from his job as a ruse shooter, Jesus spent his days wandering the land, telling all and sundry about the plight of the greater Bilby, Macrotus Legrotus. As he said to one class of primary school children, "Hi kids, this little fellow is a greater Bilby," as he produced one from a cage. Jesus saw his first Bilby on one of his late-night roo hunting pilgrimages. As he said unto the same group of children, It was a Damascene moment for him. When I saw the little bloke, I just decided I had to help. There's only about 600 left in the wild, you know. Down through the ages, Jesus has undertaken many great works, even getting funding for a Bilby sanctuary in Queensland. Unfortunately, the floods ruined the fences and feral cats got in. They killed everything. Oh, why have you forsaken them? He cried to the sky. And then the company that made the chocolate Easter Bilbies went under. The main source of funding was gone. They might have to go to China for the chocolate or the Vatican. But then an Aussie company came through. It was a chocolate miracle. Later, Jesus won an Order of Australia, became a real national treasure. But as he said so himself, blessed are the meek, for if there's anything left of the earth, they'll inherit it, the poor buggers. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living, proudly brought to you by the First Dog on the Moon Institute.
Thanks, Dog. If you're not yet chocolated out, you want to help out the Greater Bilby, and who wouldn't? Look for the Save the Bilby Fund logo when you shop for your favourite chocolate Easter Bilby. That brings us to the end of Sunday Extra for this week.
There you go. I happen to have a trio of chocolate Bilbies available to stand in at zero notice spontaneously and do a cameo. Each one of them wears a little green and white cardboard tag which states that out of the purchase price, which was $5 each, 30 cents goes to the Save the Bilby Fund, proudly donated. So now you've actually seen chocolate Bilbies. And by the miracle of not Photoshop, chocolate Bilbies with swamp wallabies on Easter Sunday. There you go. You don't get any more Ostara festivalish than that, do you? Ostara being the Nordic goddess of new life and rejuvenation, whose festival was celebrated after the vernal equinox, specifically the first full moon after the vernal equinox, because it's a fertility rite. And on fertility festivals, everybody looks their best by moonlight, especially if you're pissed, in spring while the moon is full. Here in Australia, of course, we do it on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the autumnal equinox. So we're sort of having this schizoid, well, it's supposed to be a Christian rebranding of a pagan spring fertility rite festival. And we do it after the harvest moon. It's pretty demented, but there you go. That's life in Australia. I noticed that this week some Belgian-born Belgian citizens went fizz-bang pop and blew up and killed about 34 Belgians and put a whole bunch of others in hospital. And because they were Muslims and they were born in Belgium, therefore, Malcolm turning bullshit artist got up there and he said that the problem with Belgium is that they haven't got a moat around it like Australia's got a moat. You know, they're not an island continent, so they can't actually manage to do border security very well. And he said that Europe is being flooded by ISIL sending kamikaze commandos in with the refugees. And of course, immediately the Belgian ambassador to Australia stood up and said, well, shut your face, Malcolm, you're a bloody idiot. That's not what is going on at all. These people were born in Belgium. They're not refugees from anywhere. So sadly, what Malcolm Turnbull had to say was pretty much precisely what Donald Trump had to say. And that's what got Donald Trump featuring yet again in the latest recruiting videos from ISIL. Every time Donald Trump opens his mouth and says something horrible about ISIL or about Muslims, it makes thousands of disaffected, disgruntled, dissenting people all around the world decide that they'd like to go and join ISIL because they fight against America and America looks like it's going to have a President Trump. So yeah, Malcolm Turnbull is already lining up to be flying in parallel off Donald Trump's wingtip for when Donald Trump gets to be president. And the scariest thing I heard said all week was about 3 days ago, and somebody was talking about Donald Trump and what he's doing and all the rest of it. And then they started talking about inter-religious, interracial tension in Europe. And what they said was that if you look at all of the people who are being swept electorally into positions of imminent, look like they're going to win the vote type power in Europe as a reaction against the flood of refugees coming across the Mediterranean from Africa, because, you know, let's face it, the climate has changed, the rainfall patterns are different, the agriculture has failed, there's large numbers of rural unemployed going into the towns and cities and becoming disgruntled there. Then whoever's in power tries to quell the dissent by cracking down, and that generates a civil war and a rebellion, and it all goes to shit. And then, of course, NATO's been involved in firing off its accumulated stockpile a couple of times so that they could justify issuing new rearmament contracts to keep their military industrial complex from generating unemployment in the electorates back in the rich Western industrial democratic homelands. So things are crook in the north end of Africa, not much better in the middle of Africa, and they're probably not much better in the south end of Africa. But in the north end of Africa, people can visualise walking to Europe or swimming to Europe, and they're giving it a go. It's causing a whole bunch of people who live in Europe to feel like they are being impinged upon and invaded, and they're under threat, and they are therefore kind of more or less understandably gravitating towards the tribal extreme right-wing view of things, which is put up a fence and back it with machine guns, and anybody who tries to come into our little patch of the world will be shot down. They haven't quite got to the point where they're shooting the refugees. I think the Danes are robbing them when they come to the border. If they've got more than $2,000, all the excess goes, you know, off to the Danish Department of Looking After Refugees. So what this person said was that there may well come a time when President Trump is regarded as a moderating influence on all of the radical nutters who are poised and set to come to power in Europe, as a response or as a gestalt reaction to the fact that Africa's falling to pieces and it's exporting refugees. Anybody who thinks that they've got no prospect of living where they are because all of their neighbours have gone mad and are shooting at each other has the option of joining one of the various mad neighbours and helping to shoot at the other one, or hiding and maybe starving and waiting for both the neighbours to shoot each other, or running away. And at the moment, they're all running away. In the fullness of the time, when the fossil fuel fails and there's no electrons in the grid, they won't be able to pump the fuel out of the underground bowsers at the service stations because they're all got electric pumps on them. So it'll all grind to a halt, and the refugees will be stopped by the fact that there are not many sailing boats equipped to carry large numbers of passengers anymore. There are no large fleets of draft animals to get horse-drawn and cattle-drawn wagons out of the museum and put them all back into service to run stage coaches. And there's not going to be any Herigo planes if there's no Jet A1 grade kerosene to run the airliners on. So I can't actually see this mass migration thing being as much of a problem in 20 years as it is now. At the moment, the people who want to run away have got the mobility to run away. Wait until the system collapses a bit further and they won't have that mobility. And it's moving at quite a pace, you know. I think January was 1.25 degree, 1.28 degrees hotter than any other January has ever been in the 30-year average period, or going back to 1880 when record starts. And February was 1.35 degrees hotter. So we've already warmed the planet a bloody lot. Wobbles on a lot to YouTube on the upload limit. Ciao.